Okay, hello everybody, or dober den. How are you feeling today? Are you ready for a Blazor content here? So who's ready? I know we're before lunch, but guys, we need a little bit of energy. So, are we ready for some Blazor stuff? Yes, definitely, always, Blazor rocks. Or maybe not, we'll see. But still, it's something very, very interesting. Thank you very much, Ivo, for introducing me. He already said a lot of things about me. I'm a technical director at a company called Amdaris, and for years I have this drive to share my learning experiences because I'm continuously learning, and that's why I also started a YouTube channel a while back that's going quite okay, I would say. So, out of curiosity, is anybody here in the room right now that has watched some of my videos? Just raise the hand if yes. So, let's look here. I see one hand there. Anybody else? Okay. Okay, then not. It's okay. Cool. The good thing is that I just yesterday reached 25K subscribers, so you can also subscribe to it to get more. Thank you very much for that. Cool. Now, thank you. Let's go to the important part. Let's talk about Blazor, because in the new version of .NET, Blazor has changed totally, like drastically. Let's now understand first exactly what did we have in Blazor before this change with the .NET 8. So usually, and by the way, we have a typo here, sorry for that, happens unfortunately, in the title. So the idea is that when we wanted to use Blazor in .NET, by the way, has anybody worked with Blazor so far? Raise your hand, please raise your hand. Okay. Okay, cool. So a lot more people have worked with Blazor than have watched my videos, but it's totally cool. Now, the idea is that till now, we had these two options. So when you wanted to create a Blazor application, you just had to choose something. Like, you would need to choose, do I want to use Blazor Server, or do you want to use Blazor WebAssembly? Now, this choice was very important because it really had a lot of repercussions on the way that you were developing that specific application. Now, in the Blazor Server model, the idea was, or the idea behind how it was implemented is that, okay, you have the application, and there is a WebSockets connection that is established when you load the application for the first time, and whenever you do something in the browser as a user, you just simply this event is transmitted through that WebSocket connection to the server. The server calculates, computes the necessary HTML difference that needs to be sent to the client, and it is sent back to the client through the same WebSockets connection. So everything is rendered basically on the server and communicated to the browser through this WebSockets connection, which for the user gives this impression of full single-page application because it has rich interactivity. There are obviously pros for this because everything is rendered on the server, so you have a lot more control about your security and things like that. But there's the downside, obviously, that we always have to manage or to have this WebSockets connection open. And what do we do when we have a lot of concurrent connections? We need to scale that, and that could be problematic. So there was this other model, which was very cool, because it's Blazor WebAssembly. So what do we do here? We just ship DLL to the browser, basically. So we have the request for the application, then say, hey, here's the entire .NET application in the browser. So we have this WASP compiler that compiles it, or this already compiled to WebAssembly, but everything, literally everything that you do is handled or happens directly in the browser. So this is what we had before. We need to choose one of these models. Now, this has totally changed with Blazor in .NET 8. So why did this change? Because, well, what do we do as developers, as a community? We always like to innovate, to bring new stuff. Until we actually innovate so much that we actually go 20 years back, where all our applications were SSR applications, obviously. But nowadays, everybody's hyped about SSR applications. So React created a brand new framework only for SSR. Angular even, they also have SSR. Vue.js, they also have some SSR. So what did we do in the Microsoft ecosystem? Well, we also need SSR. Everybody has our framework, so we also need SSR. So that's why it was introduced in this new .NET 8, this static server-side rendering in Blazor. And the core principle here is that you get the application every time that you request something, you get it pre-rendered in or on the server. And basically, whenever you want to do something, you kind of like do it directly pre-rendered. Now, this solves a lot of problems. It solves a lot of problems with performance. It solves a lot of problems with, for instance, well, rendering the HTML heads beforehand, so with search engine optimization. So obviously, this is a really good thing. However, there are obviously some challenges to it, because if you have initial server or statically rendered content, obviously that's for the initial load, but you still need interactivity. Now, the idea is that Microsoft, they did spend a lot of effort and time to actually bring in this SSR model a lot of already functionality that we didn't have 20 years back. Now, for instance, 20 years back, when we had a regular MVC application, when you did load a page, when you clicked on a button or wanted to submit a form or just wanted to navigate to another part of the page, what did we do, or what did happen? Well, a full page reload. That's what we needed to do. Now, in Blazor SSR, this is not the case, because it is already enhanced with a lot of functionality that kind of like gives the look and feel of a fully, let's say, single-page application, but by still being SSR, or statically rendered. However, obviously, when it comes to rich interactivity, like what happens if I click this button? It explodes, boom. No, but the idea is that when you click a button, when you scroll, when you do something, that's already rich interactivity, and you can't really place all the tech in this SSR model that kind of like can handle everything. So what this actually means for us in practice is that we need to kind of like have this SSR, which is the default now in Blazor, but on top of this SSR, we can add interactivity only where we need it. Now, there are two approaches to adding this rich interactivity. One approach, you can add it globally for your entire application. But if you add it globally for your entire application, the downside is that it will behave like a regular, let's say, Blazor application before .NET. So it will be either a Blazor server application, or it will be either a Blazor WebAssembly application. But with the per page or component interactivity, and that's here really the nice part, is that you can have, let's say, most of the application rendered or statically rendered, and then only add interactivity in the components where you really need that specific interactivity. And that gives a lot of power, because a lot of things can be done directly on the server. You don't always need to have a WebSockets connection open. You don't always need to ship the entire Blazor application to the browser, because you can ship only the components to the browser that need, for instance, WebAssembly interactivity. So we have this choice that we can make between global interactivity and component interactivity. Cool. Now, because we can do this, actually, there are different modes or render modes that we have in this new Blazor. Like I said, by default, when you create a new Blazor application, it is a SSR application. And then you can add interactivity. However, okay, the question is, what interactivity, what type of interactivity do I want to add to my application? Do I want to add WebAssembly interactivity? Like it would use kind of like then WebAssembly, obviously, or do I want, let's say, server interactivity with the WebSockets connection? And the cool thing is that you can choose whatever you want. You can choose for some components to have server interactivity. For other components, you can choose definitely to have WebAssembly interactivity. Now, the idea is that if we have these two modes, like server error and WebAssembly, the thing is that both of them can be also activated globally, so you can activate them at a global level. Now, if you choose for some of your components to have server interactivity, what it will happen is that when those components are loaded, only in that specific moment a WebSockets connection is established, because only that component then communicates to that WebSockets connection to get the information that it needs for the rich interactivity, but not the other components. And the moment that that component gets disposed, you navigate away and you don't need it anymore, the WebSockets connection is closed again. So that solves a lot of problem about or with scalability of these WebSockets connections. However, if on the other side you want to have Blazor WebAssembly interactivity, The moment when you load that component that is or has WebAssembly interactivity, you ship to the browser basically the WebAssembly part, the WebAssembly component that kind of like has the logic for that specific component and not the entire application. That also solves a lot of problems that we had previously with Blazor WebAssembly. However, there is also a third mode, which is a very interesting one, which is called Interactive Auto. Now, the Interactive Auto mode tries to somehow combine these two rendering modes, because both of them have their pros and their cons. Now, the Blazor server or the server interactivity with the WebSockets connection is very fast, because you don't require to download anything to the browser. On the other hand, if you have this WebAssembly interactivity, it requires you to download stuff to the browser. So, in Interactive Auto, what happens is that when the component is initially loaded, there is a WebSockets connection established, and in the background, the necessary DLL files or WebAssembly components or whatever is needed is downloaded in the background, and once everything is downloaded, then it is automatically switched to full WebAssembly interactivity. So the advantage for this mode is that it's kind of like you start having rich interactivity right out of the box when the component is loaded, because you already have the WebSockets connection. But once everything else is loaded, you go basically back to this WebAssembly interactivity. Now, one very, from my point of view, cumbersome point of this interactivity that requires Interactive Auto or Blazor WebAssembly is that you need an additional project basically in your solution that will be the WebAssembly host, because that WebAssembly host needs to be shipped to the browser when you have WebAssembly interactivity. So that's why even if you start a new template, like a new Blazor application from the template and choose there that you want to have WebAssembly interactivity, you will say that you will see that in your solution you will have two projects. One is actually your Blazor application, but the other one is the Blazor WebAssembly host that you need in order to have this type of interactivity. If you use only server interactivity, on the other hand, you don't need that additional project. So you will see that solutions that you start from that template will have only one single project, because you don't need the WebAssembly host anymore. So you kind of like need to weigh in a little bit what's needed here. Now, if we go a little bit further, is that, as said, what happened or what's different from what we had 20 years back with regular MVC applications is that even if everything is initially statically rendered on the server, the idea is that Blazor SSR has a lot of features that already kind of like mimic some interactivity. And I want to explain you exactly how this actually works. Now, one of the features that we have in Blazor SSRs is called enhanced navigation. Now, the problem is that previously, like in regular MVC application, when you navigated from one page to another, you had a full page reload, yeah? So, obviously, that's an experience that users don't want to have anymore, because we are not 20 years back. We are in 2024, so we want everything to happen instantly and not see continuously things that are re-rendered and reloaded and refreshed. We don't want to see that. So, how did Microsoft solve this problem? So, if you run this type of project, any Blazor SSR project, you will see that whenever you debug or run the application, if you check your network development tools, you will see that there is one JavaScript file, which is this blazor.web.js file. Now, how does the navigation work? This JavaScript file contains some bunch of different code, but for this navigation, it kind of like really intercepts everything that you do in the browser, like everything that you do there. And if it sees that you want to navigate from one page to another, it will intercept that, it will make itself a request to the Blazor application, it will then receive back the new HTML, and it will do simply a DOM patching with the new HTML. Now, the end result for the user is that everything is seamless. Everything resembles a real single-page application. Even if you navigate, there is no full-page reload, because it's a DOM patching action that happens there, and that's handled by this blazor.web.js file. And this is how the navigation works, that it resembles to be very seamless. But another very important thing that we do in all applications, we post forms, yeah? So initially, or in regular MVC, when you post a form, well, you post it, you get a new page back, you do a full refresh. Now in Blazor SSR, you don't really need to do that, because there is this other feature, which is enhanced form post, that works actually very similarly to what we have with the enhanced navigation, only that in this case, this Blazor.WebJS has actually logic to interact or to intercept, hey, you just wanted to post a form. Cool. Now, I'll go to the server, obviously, and I'll check with the server, okay, hey, I want to post this form. Now, the server then obviously checks, okay, does this form exist? What action should be triggered if this form exists so that we can perform something? And it finds that form, it invokes the action for that form, it performs the logic, and then once again, the result or the return, which is basically probably a new HTML, it will simply then be patched to the DOM by this Blazor WebJS file. And this is how we can seamlessly post forms without any type of interactivity. So for form posting and navigation, we don't need to add interactivity, like the server interactivity or the WebAssembly one. We just need to do that or to use this feature, and everything is there out of the box. Now, this can also be used in conjunction with another feature that's very, very nice, and that solves a very common problem that we have, which is stream rendering. Now, another common scenario that we have in all applications is when we want to get some data, some lists of whatever, employees, conference speakers, conference participants like you, we want to get a list of them. Now, this involves a database, and we know databases might be a little bit slow. And the request will then obviously take some time. So the problem was that in regular server-rendered applications, well, you just have to wait until that data is available, but not in Blazor SSR, because we have this stream rendering that what it actually does, and it's very, very cool from my perspective, it kind of like makes the initial request to the server, and the server says, or sees, okay, so this is a type of kind of request or a page, a component that requires some data from the database. So if you enable stream rendering on that component, which is just using an attribute, then what it will happen is that you can specify an HTML like a loading button or a spinner or progression bar or whatever. So when the request comes in, the Blazor server will return that initial HTML with the loading spinner. Then it will go to the database. It will get the data that it needs. And when the data is available, it will send it through the same HTTP connection to the client, and the DOM will be patched with the new HTML. So the cool stuff here is that when the initial call, HTTP call, is made to the server, and when you return the HTML, the initial HTML, the connection is not closed. So it remains open. If you check your browser tools, you will see in the network that the connection remains open, and it remains open until also the last part of the response, like containing the resources that you loaded from the database, is then also rendered to the browser, and only then the HTTP connection is closed. And this is also another problem, because whenever you need to load data in a component, you don't need interactivity for that. Just the server-side render model that we have already helps us, because it has this type of feature that helps us to have already interactivity with these very common scenarios. Now, some benefits of using this new Blazor SSR model is obviously that we have better performance compared to either of the other hosting models. And one other thing that I like a lot, and I know we hate, or everybody, or almost everybody hates, is authentication and authorization. Now, one very, I don't know, bad thing or a bad experience for developers in Blazor till now was that if you wanted to do authentication and authorization in Blazor, well, you needed kind of like a lot of different strange workarounds. We just use Razor components, or Razor pages actually for the authentication part, or kind of like do a lot of different other type of stuff. But now that we have everything is fully server rendered, we can have authentication and authorization directly in our Razor components. So we can have everything directly there. We don't need to have a lot of other stuff that's razor pages and things like that. We can have everything there. And that's very important. And it gives us a lot of flexibility because we have the SSR model. In the SSR model, we already have features, as I've showed, like form posting and navigation and stream rendering, that already basically adds interactivity without the need for you to specify an interactivity model. But then for rich interactivity, you can add interactivity through either the server interactivity or the WebAssembly one. Now, there are also, sorry, this doesn't, okay. There are also some challenges here. Now, the most important challenge from my point of view with this new model is that when you write components, Blazor components, theoretically or by the documentation, you should write components in a way that is agnostic about whether that component will be rendered with Blazor WebAssembly interactivity or with server interactivity. Which theoretically makes sense, it's okay, but in practice, that's actually very cumbersome. Because in the end, you'll end up having logic in your component to find out, okay, am I running right now in the server interactivity or WebAssembly interactivity? Because I might need to do in the component things differently based on if I run on the server or if I run through WebAssembly. Overall, the developer experience, I think, kind of like changed a lot. And if you really critically think about it, you will see that in the new Blazor SSR, when you develop, kind of like, it actually resembles more the way that we did development on regular old-style MVC applications. Like even how you do the redirect to login and things like that. There are a lot of things that are more familiar to how we did it in MVC. And by the way, advertisement on my channel, I have a lot of videos about Blazor, about the older Blazors, about the new ones, so you can definitely check there out more such stuff. Cool. And basically, that's it. We need to be aware that there are also some challenges. We need to be aware that this is something very new, like in the last version. It's always a journey. So the first release, the first version might not always be the best one ever. But I think it's exciting that we have this journey and that we are in this journey. And it's important for us to kind of like try to keep track, to try to keep up with it and see exactly how we can take everything that's best from this new Blazor model and bring it basically to our customer. This being said, really appreciate you all being here. And I would like to thank you very much for your patience. Have a great day.